All right, we are going to get started. Good morning. It's been one of those days. Good afternoon, evening. Welcome. You have three of us helping facilitate today. Like I said last week, my name is Elisa Shore. I'm Senior Director. I work with all the high schools. I will pass it over to Carl and Keeley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carl Logan. I'm one of the area senior directors.
Keeley Simpson, Regional Superintendent, and I'll be your note taker. So if it looks like I'm not listening, I'm listening, I'm just typing. So I'm probably not going to see your faces, but I'll be taking notes on what you're saying.
And Jed Roberts, Flow Analytics, here to help as needed.
And our focus is actually on two of the scenarios, A and B. And so with that in mind, Jed, is it possible for you to share scenario A, so just so that we are clear on what the differences are between those two, A and B?
I will share that screen. Yeah, let's do it. Okay.
And Jed, can you share this specifically the differences between the two?
Yeah, so they're actually really the same when it gets to the middle school level for Kellogg. You see that all the grades 6 through 8 students from the Spanish DLI programs in Southeast are at Kellogg, as well as with the neighborhood programs, Arleta, Creston, and Marysville. The main difference here is a phase 2 issue, which is around whether or not it's a whole school a whole school Spanish DLI K-5 model at Lent, or if it's co-located between Lent and Atkinson at the K-5 level there.
Okay, so the main distinction is at the bottom where it says Spanish DLI only at Lent, or on option B at the bottom where it is at Lent and at Atkinson.
Right, and both of these have the K through 5 Bridger 2 strands moving away from Bridger, either being at Atkinson or at Lent with those existing single strands.
Okay. Okay, so before we go into thinking through and have a discussion around the RESJ questions for these two options, does anyone have any clarifying questions about option A and B?
Can I ask a question? Why are we looking only at options A and B and not all the options after we did that last week? Because I see merits in B and C. They're also, like Jen mentioned, they're also very similar. That I feel like at least they should be discussed as a whole a little bit more. I think I was really digging the process last week in which we were narrowing down even more for each group.
Yeah, this is just one way of just getting us focused on less rather than more. So a group is looking at those two. I just don't remember which group it is. So rather than looking at all the scenarios, each group has 2 scenarios or two options.
And I think part of the idea is we're going to do these 2, other groups will do the other 2, and then we'll report back and hear kind of what comes out, so that when we go into step 2, we can look at that. If we, as this group, choose to look at just B and C, then that's what we can do, and based on what we heard in the whole group.
Okay, and when you say we're looking at B and A and B,
Mhm.
then we're also looking at B option B1, B2, and B3, correct? I see Jed nodding. So
Yeah,
yes.
I would work through the implications of those different different ways.
So
So
Jen,
if
can you
the-
clarify then what B1, 2, and 3
Right,
are
right,
then? So
yeah,
everybody
yeah,
has that
yeah.
clear?
Yeah. So that's the combination at the K5 level that I was mentioning, right? If it's either 3 strands at Atkinson or 3 strands at Lent. And then the other difference there is at the 6-8 level as to whether Mount Tabor and Kellogg programs stay separate from one another. That's the third option there.
I'm sorry, say that last one again, please.
The third option would have the strands that feed through Atkinson stay feeding over to Mount Tabor, and the other option would have them together. And that's not shown really well on the feeder graphic there, but it is in one of the tables a little bit further down in the option guide. And I realize that's confusing.
Can somebody attach the Excel spreadsheet that has all of the A, B, 1, 2, 3 to the chat so we can all look at it together?
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Are we going through the equity lens questions?
Yeah, unless there's any other clarifying questions about A and B. So if we look at A, and we look at the questions that we're to think through, right? It's how will each demographic group be impacted? Are there any unintended consequences to this option? Are there strategies in place to mitigate any negative impact in this option? That's 2. Then of course, 1 is what are the implications for RESJ in this option? So thoughts, wonderings, questions?
Well, I was looking specifically at B3. And I spent this weekend talking with other individuals about it. And I'm thinking if we can do B3 with Spanish DLI, because a lot of people want to do Spanish DLI at Kellogg, but take out Creston, as Creston is the closest south to Cleveland, knowing that Cleveland has lower enrollment. That might be a good option. I don't know what other people thought of that. Rosie, I see you nodding your head. I don't know if it's an agreement or disagreement. Please share.
I just remember reading that suggestion somewhere, and I liked the idea of just holding off on Creston till later, just because, like you said, it is closer to Cleveland. It is a little bit closer to Hosford. So maybe not committing that one yet, just because it's a little bit more conducive to other options.
So rethinking that in phase 2?
Yeah.
Many people get a chance to read what Beth shared about high school enrollment impacts. So, yeah, I mean, I think so an unintended consequence of having Creston enrolled at Kellogg would be that it may eliminate the option for Harrison Park to feed to Franklin, unless there was a split high school feeder from Kellogg, which I think was not a popular idea, but I guess not impossible. But so yeah, I would be in favor of not making a decision in phase 1 to have Creston feed to Kellogg, because then it could really limit options for Harrison Park, which we are currently, I guess, pretending doesn't exist, which I think is a major, consequence of doing things this way.
So for that challenge you guys raised, other than pausing it until phase 2, are there any other strategies to mitigate that challenge?
This isn't necessarily a strategy, but I feel like just a roadblock that I keep finding is like, I feel like I get to things and then the high school overcrowding piece comes up, and then I feel like I'm like walking into brick walls in every direction. I don't really know where to go from there. So yeah, I guess just an acknowledgement of where my mind keeps reaching dead ends is when we get to that high school overcrowding piece.
The dead end in the maze.
Yes, I keep ending up there.
Well, another thing that I would like to point out is that option B3 that has Creston feeding to Cleveland and Harrison Park feeding to Franklin is the same as option C without Creston, basically. So I just that which is the reason why I wanted to point that out. Like option B3 is option C without Creston feeding to Franklin. And that was my questioning of the similarities of looking just at A and B, knowing that B and C are so similar.
Okay. Any other thoughts about A?
Well, I think A ends up being too high of, we're going into Kellogg with too high a percentage. We know, I would assume we could get some data on like, what does the new school, what's that bump? What's that percentage bump that happens when we open a new school? And so going in at least 80% seems like a little bit too high to go in for Kellogg, because you're going to get extra, that bump, and then that translates into Franklin, and so we're not accomplishing the goals that we're trying to do.
And maybe there's something to learn if we look back at the data at Fabian when it reopened.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
So Fabian wasn't a new school, but we built a new building, and when they moved back, there was a bump, but I don't know exactly what percentage or what increase it was, but there was definitely an increase of students in a new school.
Yeah, so I was part of that coalition because I used to work at Concordia as a professor.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And Fabian had an increase because more families were choosing to stay within the Fabian building. So that catchment rate increased for Fabian rather than decrease like it usually had in previous history.
Yep.
So I think that gets right to that. How do we mitigate for any of these problems? And one is to look at like, where does Creston go? So I think that's a great way that we're using this tool. I'm curious if there's other parent perspectives, or if you go down through the option guide, right, it starts to look at some demographics of what Kellogg would look like. And so I'm curious if looking at that, or any other perspectives around option A before we move on to the next one.
Well, a more general question. So are you saying that just like the appeal of a brand new building draws more students? So if that's the case, then we should be under enrolling Kellogg slightly and over enrolling Harrison Park slightly, or, having Harrison Park's enrollment be higher, right? So that would, suggests to me definitely having to go with an option in phase one that puts Kellogg lower than we anticipate, right?
I think from, just looking at past history, I think that's a logical it's a logical step to believe that, yeah, a bump will happen solely because it's a brand new building.
Chad, can I ask a question? What is the percentage that would decrease of utilization for Kellogg for option B3 if Creston is not part of that utilization percentage?
Let me run those numbers for you really quick. So you're just saying B, which option without?
B3
Okay, yeah, let me take a look.
without Creston.
I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you.
And while he's doing that, should we try to tackle a little bit of option B? Put some of these, thinking through some of these questions.
Are we on option B now, Carl?
Yes.
Does everyone have that in front of them? Do we need to put it back on the screen?
The chart, the visual of B.
Mhm.
Can people see that? Is that option B on there?
I think we all have it. It's not on the screen. Everyone, is there anyone who doesn't have the visual of B?
Which visual are we talking about? The one with the little school, like that one?
Yes. Yep. With the schoolhouses.
So Michael or Beth or is there anyone else, anyone we haven't heard from that has some ideas or thoughts as we look at these?
Hi, everyone. I'm not Michael or Beth, but
You're welcome
my
to
name's
join
Kate.
too.
My name's Caitlin Clens. I'm the principal at Hosford Middle School. I just would love to share that in my experience in 15 years in middle school, it's working in a variety of schools and districts. It's really difficult for middle schools to split and go to two different high schools versus elementary schools splitting and going to different middle schools. It's always feels easiest if you have what's called clean feeder patterns when you go through one pattern. But one elementary goes to a middle school and the middle school goes to the high school is considered a clean feeder pattern. But the experience that I've had working at schools where the middle school splits significantly is less cohesive because it's only 3 years you're coming or you're going. And it's difficult to build that relationship with families, but also for the kids to bond together from different elementary schools. So I just like to share that with this group, that I found it to be really powerful to keep middle schools together when they go to high schools, if possible.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Did everyone see Jed's notes in the chat about the utilization will be at 70.9?
as far as the RESJ lens there, the A and B are so similar, like the numbers, the percentages look really similar in both of those things. One difference that I do see is it's only B3 that has more of the strands together, the Spanish DLI strands. Just one or two strands in the B2 and B1. But otherwise they just look very similar in the demographics and the experience and the integration side.
Kathy, will you repeat that one more time to make sure that I capture it when we're talking about demographic?
I'm just noticing at the bottom of the chart, like option A compared to all the option Bs, where they break down the percent range between the most and least represented race and ethnicity. And they're all right around 34. B2 is the highest at 35. So I'm assuming that means there's be more white students at Kellogg with B2. And then the free and reduced rate stays right around 29, except at B2 it's 32%. So a little bit higher. That's the higher free meal.
One wondering that I have is I'm wondering from how many Bridger, I wonder how many people that live close to Bridger are in their Spanish immersion program and what that would look like to having them move all the way down to Lent, if that were the case. And I'm thinking similarly to the situation that was proposed with Woodstock, where a lot of families were saying that if it does move to a further away place, that they might exit the program and stay in their neighborhood school. So I guess a couple wonderings, like how many families would the distance to Lent be a problem, and like how many families are going to stay with the program even if it's further away? Just a couple of thoughts that I had about that.
Rosie, I was able to get that data actually, because I was wondering exactly the same thing. And
what did you find out?
Yeah, at this time, there is, for Atkinson, there's only 8 families that live within 1 mile of Lent. And at this time for Bridger, there's only 12 families that live within 1 mile of Lent. So it would create some issues. Yeah.
Martha, what's the same for Atkinson? Do you have that? I'm just curious.
For Atkinson to live inside of the 1 mile radius for Lent?
Yeah.
Only
no, like if Atkinson's DLI stayed, like that same kind of scenario, you're talking about, like essentially like when you're talking about radiuses.
So we have for Atkinson, we have over 28 families that live within the 1 mile radius of Atkinson. That's taken into consideration that Atkinson is only 1 strand. And for Bridger, let me see. Dentro de una milla de Bridger, they have 27 families that live within 1 mile of the Bridger boundary.
Thank you.
Martha, are those the native families or just the families in general in the program?
Those are native Spanish-speaking families. Specifically, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to get the data for all families, but if we're talking about using the RESJ lens, I was specifically looking for native Spanish-speaking families that live within the radius of schools.
You said 28 that live in the Atkinson boundary or within 1 mile of Atkinson is what you said for grades K-5?
And then 27 for Bridger.
That's for all of K5? 27 to 28?
Just pulling it up. Thank you, Jen.
I'm having a hard time seeing those numbers. There's a way to zoom in at all?
Can you read them to us?
Or Jed, could you screenshot it and just stick it in the document that you've been screenshotting things into?
Yeah, I will go ahead and do that.
Thank
I'll
you.
drop it. I'll drop it below the polls for you. Okay.
Thank you, Jed.
Thanks, Jed.
Okay. Let me stop sharing here.
I'm just going to do a quick time check. I think we have 3 minutes left.
Yeah, 7:10's break.
And then while I'm talking, do we have someone that wants to volunteer? Do we have a parent that wants to volunteer to share out what we've talked about? Rosie, Martha, anybody?
I'm going to defer to because I've got 2 unpredictables here.
Michael?
I did last time.
It's good.
I
That
don't want
puts you,
to.
that puts you toward the
I
front of
don't
the
want to
line.
again.
You said you will or you don't want to?
I really don't want to this time, to be honest.
Marissa?
I'm not sure where we're at exactly. I mean, we're presenting that we sort of, I mean, I guess the question about inevitable like high school repercussions, we've decided that Creston should probably be, we should hold off on making a decision to have Creston feed to Kellogg. Are we in agreement on that? And then having Kellogg, you know, I think 70% sounds like kind of a good target if we're thinking that it might, enrollment might actually end up increasing at Kellogg. Does that sound like something we can agree on? And then, you know, then that leaves like subtracting Creston, that leaves A, C, and then which of the Bs as like similar enrollment sizes?
B3, right? I think it was B3.
B3. I mean, I could present that information if you all would like. If someone else wants to, that would be great.
Thank you, Marissa.
Okay.
Is Harrison Park
Thank
a
you.
part of what we're supposed to be doing in phase 1?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Say again.
Is Harrison Park a part of what we're supposed to be doing in phase 1?
Well, I've asked repeatedly as a Harrison Park parent, you know, how we were, yeah, so I was told by Scott Bailey last week that yes, we should absolutely be thinking about the repercussions on Harrison Park of anything we decide in phase 1, but we are officially, I guess, I feel sort of pretending it doesn't exist. But I mean, yes, we are supposed to be talking about it. That's what we were told by Scott Bailey last week.
Hello, everyone. Just wanted to let you know that I'm solo parenting today, so I might be eating dinner while keeping an eye on the kids and trying to put them to bed tonight. So apologies.
Right there with you.
Yep. No need to apologize on that. I think we're all trying to manage. So, welcome back, everyone. Before we jump into talking about scenarios, I went back to our notes from last week, and we did have an accomplishment last week is that we eliminated 2 scenarios from our conversation. So that was E and F. We talked about a little bit about well, the other 4, A, B, C, and D. And if I remember right, and Martha, I think you alluded to this when we started, is that we had hoped to focus a little bit on B and C in our conversation today. We talked about really looking to see what the impact was on Bridger in whatever final sort of option we look at or options we look at. And it seemed as though there was consensus in our group around having Spanish DLI at Kellogg. So those are just some summary points as we head into the next step in the conversation. I'm just checking to see if anybody has things that I missed or somebody feeling a little differently. So Jed, I hate to put you on the spot again, but I'm curious if you could pull up B and C and just remind us of the differences there.
Melissa,
Yeah, let me just get that pulled up and please continue discussing.
so if I'm remembering correctly though, when I think I'm the one that went out, I think we were talking about B and D because of the Bridger overflow. Am I mistaken?
I had D in my head, but I was trying to find it in the notes. So
yeah, I mean, I think I remember we were trying to figure out a way between B and D, you know, basically, which I think maybe Jed was trying to point out that C was kind of alluding to that a little bit, or I can't remember exactly. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
So Jed, maybe walk us through B, C, and D.
Yeah, I think though, I will just say that it felt like to me that B was definitely the one that we focused on more than anything else, but we are still trying to figure out the Bridger overcrowding issue, which again, may be part of phase 2, et cetera, but if I'm remembering correctly, but please correct me if I'm wrong, anyone.
All right, I will start walking through here. And yeah, for Kellogg, really across the board, you're seeing, you know, all 4 of those strands for 6-8, Spanish DLI at Kellogg, just to start with the DLI piece here. And I'm going to scroll down to the next page for option D, which also has that going on. So really what we're looking at for differences here are the neighborhood schools that are feeding. So option B, that's Arleta, Creston, Lent, and Marysville. For option C, you see that Creston drops off from that group. And with option D, you are swapping in a couple of schools. So Bridger is making an appearance here as a neighborhood school, and Atkinson is actually a Spanish DLI only that feeds up. So yep, that's the story with those 3.
I wonder if oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was wondering if maybe the next thing that we can agree upon is that we want Arleta and Marysville to go to Kellogg. I'm just trying to figure out little pieces that we can kind of chip away. Like, can we agree on that?
I see a thumbs
behind
up.
my shoulder. So yes.
2 thumbs up.
Yeah, let's do it.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And the other thing, I think, Richard, didn't you mention something about trying to figure out a way to get the Spanish DLI, was it you? The Bridger Spanish DLI to go to Kellogg, the neighbor, or the other middle school section actually go to Harrison Park as soon as next year? Was that part of the discussion, if I'm remembering correctly? It seems like it was last year at this point.
That was last week to deal with the overcrowding. We had suggested possibly moving Bridger 6-8 immediately in phase 1 instead of waiting until phase 2 just to deal with the overcrowding right away.
Yeah, and I have talked to Harrison Park's principal about it, and she's really confident that Harrison Park has the space to take the 6th through 8 kids from Bridger next year. And I mean, I just really struggle to see if Bridger half a mile from Harrison Park does not feed to Harrison Park. I'm just really struggling to see how Harrison Park will be enrolled adequately.
I'm also wondering, Richard, how big is the class of Lent Spanish DLI for middle school that would be feeding? Because I know that there have been some attrition numbers that are lower in other DLI programs over at Lent. Is that a correct assumption or an incorrect assumption?
That is incorrect. We have 1 grade level that's really under enrolled in DLI. The rest are at or above numbers. So there's roughly 75 6-8 DLI kids.
Thank you for that.
Okay, I'm going to try to move another thing forward.
Yeah, I think I was just about to say the same thing, Melissa.
Okay, so how about we agree that Bridger DLI next year goes to Kellogg? Can we agree on that? And can we agree that Bridger neighborhood would go to Harrison Park? So I think one thing about that I think maybe my community is confused about is like the boundaries. And so it has nothing to do with boundaries, right? It has to do with, because like I think some of my families were asking, like, we're in the neighborhood program, so but we're in, like, they're seeing themselves in the boundaries it looks like for Kellogg, and so they wanted to know if then they get to go to Kellogg. But or can somebody clarify how that works?
Yeah, so I mean, in phase 2, boundary changes would be on the table. I think what you're talking about right now is just, current enrollment in the Bridger neighborhood program, right? That may or may not be within the neighborhood, but is more than likely within the neighborhood, right? Moving over to Harrison Park and just taking that enrollment wholesale.
Yeah.
Yep. That would be the move that you're talking about right now. No adjustments to boundaries to change up the quote unquote homeschool.
So just to clarify, we're thinking of, or we're feeling out Spanish DLI going from Bridger, going to Kellogg, and then anyone from neighborhood middle school at Bridger, we would put to Harrison Park at a later date. Is that what the kind of we're feeling out right now?
No, they would have to go next year too, because there's only 3 classrooms. There's 1 6th grade, 1 7th grade, and 1 8th grade. And when we pull,
there's room potentially to move them as soon as next year. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that personally, you get 2 thumbs up for me. I think that makes a lot of sense.
And Melissa, I'm thinking about a situation, as you mentioned, Kellogg is currently in the Bridger attendance area. So the awkward situation where you've got a student that's in grades 6 through 8 who lives like right on top of Kellogg going over to Harrison Park. And I would be really surprised that we don't get, Kellogg's boundary changed. So you don't have Harrison Park's boundary, right, overlapping with Kellogg in phase 2 here. So I think that would be resolved, and that there would probably be the option for a 6th through 8th student to make that change over to Kellogg at that point.
So since there's a difference between Kellogg opening next year and the boundary changes happening in 2022, what happens in 2021 for that mess that boundaries aren't going to change for next year, but yet we're opening a school?
The boundaries would change next year, right? I mean, phase 2 is like this spring.
They said boundaries change in 2022.
But I think let's see, maybe Jed can correct me if I'm incorrect. I think what would happen, so if I am a Bridger neighborhood kid, based on what we've just maybe kind of agreed to, I would go to, I technically would be in the historic Kellogg neighborhood, but I'm at Bridger in their neighborhood section right now. So next year I would go to Harrison Park, start middle school, have a great time. Then this whole process goes through the boundary review process with some sort of then, and I think Judy talked about it at the last meeting, some sort of like, I think the term's grandfathering, there's got to be a better term for it, where if I started Harrison Park, I'd be allowed to continue, but there may also be if you start, there may be a place where families would get a choice or something like that to say, okay, now we're moving this boundary, incoming 5th graders all go here, but kids who moved, we're not going to make you move for 1 year and then make you move for the next year.
Like they would have a choice.
Yeah.
And that's guaranteed as part of the process?
That's what we've done in the past, and I believe Judy referenced it at the last meeting.
That's what we've done in the past, but I mean, this is a new board, so.
Well, and I would want to have the conversation with the advisory team that, you know, maybe there is an area really near to Kellogg where there's some kind of ability to make that choice.
I sort of feel like that's important if we're talking about like impacts on families, because some families have siblings really close, like grades apart. So you could easily have a student starting out in and going to Harrison Park, and then the incoming 5th grader at Kellogg, and now you're asking families to split 3 schools possibly. So I don't know, just that's a concern that just comes up to me, that that's an impact that could happen for some families. And I think, and you've said this before, Melissa, too, but how that school is getting stretched and spread and scattered, and that's a big impact. I just wonder, you know, how we could maybe racialize that or look at that, like what's happening to those communities too. But I do like the idea of having more space. I wonder, Jed, if you have what it would look like if Creston wasn't there, the demographics of the mix, if it is just Marysville, Arleta, and the DLI. Did we have that somewhere with all those numbers?
So Marysville, Arleta, what option are we looking at? Just bring me
Yeah.
for that really quick.
Is that
It's
what
like C-ish.
C-ish, yeah, with just Marysville, Arleta, and all 4 strands of DLI, what are the demographics then?
Yeah, I'm checking, and I don't think that we've got that one worked up, but let me check with my partners in the other room here. I think they may have been looking at something like that.
And doesn't C also include then the neighborhood kids from Lent currently, if we were to look at C as it's written?
Good question.
Yeah, yes, it would include the neighborhood as well.
What does, if with this option, what does Bridger look like then? Is it a K-5? I guess what's left at Bridger once we've made some of these changes? My brain needs help with that one.
So I think depending on which one we choose, Bridger would be a K-5 with 2 strands of DLI and 1 neighborhood. And so then the question is, I think that, you know, that maybe that's the next conversation we need to have. I think that's the kind of that last piece that we have to decide upon is the Spanish DLI and what configuration do we want, you know, to do with the DLI. I was just trying to get to us maybe the piece with Bridger with the middle school like that. I felt like was it maybe an easier piece for us to agree upon before we take on
that makes sense.
Piece.
Melissa, the option we've been talking about with Bridger's middle school going to Harrison Park, the DLI going to Kellogg, does that eliminate D as an option then?
Well, I don't think, I'll just be honest, and I think Rosie mentioned this, I don't think Bridger should go to Kellogg, whatever Bridger ends up being, because Bridger is right next to Harrison Park. This is the problem with us not looking at Harrison Park also, is we have to think about like, how do we make sure Harrison Park has the right amount of feeder schools too.
So
and Melissa, oh, sorry, John.
Just say what I'm trying to do is follow on your path of chipping away at eliminating things one after the other.
Yeah,
if that's what we've done.
I feel like that essentially eliminates D if we're
Yeah.
kind of in agreement about those previous decisions.
And Melissa, if I'm getting this right, what you're saying is Bridger Spanish DLI, and in theory, what we're saying all Spanish DLI to Kellogg, and for middle school grades, and then Bridger neighborhood to Harrison Park. Is that correct? I just want to clarify that.
yes. Well, And then the question is, because I know a lot of our neighborhood families live in the current Kellogg potential boundary area. So that's the difficulty. And then if it's a 1-year fix, and then the families, I don't know. I just feel like Kathy said, that maybe if we had lowered the amount to 70%, maybe Bridger could go that first year. They all could go. Just I don't know.
Well, if we take out Creston, sorry, from the mix, then the percentage lowers to 70%. Correct? So then that would hit that target of 70%. Am I incorrect in that?
And I noticed, Beth, you put a question in there about Harrison Park, Hosford. And were you thinking, just to get an idea then, if then Creston would, if it goes to Hosford, what those numbers would look like? Is that what I'm making an assumption there, so feel free to jump in.
No, you're making the right assumption, because when Min said that it's really important for Woodstock to continue at Hosford, I think that that's something that we want to consider. And I wondered what the Creston boundary would do to Hosford if that moves over.
That's an excellent question, Beth.
I was wondering, Melissa, what did you mean by families who are currently in the Kellogg boundary? Because I mean, Kellogg doesn't currently exist, so I just didn't know what you meant by that.
Well, if you look at previous historical, so Bridger goes pretty close to Kellogg, and so we have lots of families in that area that are neighborhood, right? And so it's just hard for them to visualize.
So you mean when Kellogg used to be open, the historical boundary? Yeah, I mean, I completely understand, like, being closer, families, being concerned about being closer to one school than the school that they are assigned to, but I don't think that argument is really in line with, RESJ lens. I mean, because that is what we are trying to make decisions based on, right? So like if you look at the map, there's, if you scoot it over east a little bit, you can see that there's a really large portion of the Harrison Park boundary that's a lot closer to Kellogg than it is to Harrison Park. And so why do those students have that hardship and not, we have to, it's more about balancing enrollment than it is like saying that everybody can, not everybody can go to the school that's actually closest to their home because of just the way the schools are located.
Yeah, I just think that we're going to have to, have those statements, right? Like this is why we chose this, just be really clear about why we're doing something.
And I don't know if this helps, but the original springboard, which I realize we've taken out because of the need to change, had both Arleta and Marysville go north, so that they were, I guess, taking some of those students into the attendance areas that are currently Bridger attendance area students.
Yeah, that's right. Just to ensure that Kellogg was within its own attendance area. That was moved up to, I believe, Brooklyn or Woodward or so.
So
And
go ahead.
No, that's a phase 2 part, right? So as we look at what size do we want Kellogg, that's important to consider. So sorry, Rosie, go ahead.
I'm just kind of thinking out loud about the Creston piece. Can Hosford absorb Creston without moving a DLI group out?
Our current enrollment is 673, and I would say no. I mean, this is just as the print. I don't know if enrollment's going to drop, 100 kids next year because of the pandemic, and we don't know what the future holds in that way. But I do think, we're full. We're 100% full right now. We have an ISC program as well, and I cannot see us absorbing an additional school as well as our DLI program.
I also think it's important to note that just because the, I don't know how to say this, just because the outspoken Woodstock parents feel strongly that their group stays at Hosford doesn't mean that that opinion is worth any more weight than what the Harrison Park immersion families feel is best for them. So I think it's important to note that, you know, the loudest voices aren't necessarily more important than voices that we haven't heard yet. And so while many folks feel that Hosford is a good choice for them, that doesn't mean that it's the best choice for all of the DLI families. So for whatever, that's where.
Do we have any idea what the Chinese-speaking families at Harrison Park would like?
Well, I mean, I can't, speak for everyone there. I mean, I'm in close contact with the Chinese families at Harrison Park because I'm a DLI parent there, but there is a group I mentioned in the chat. There's a group of Chinese-speaking parents, Chinese parents who are like working on a letter with what they prefer and are trying to get it in. But I think there's been some disagreements, so it hasn't been that completed yet, like every group. So, I mean, there's definitely been evolving perspectives along the way after hearing from other groups. Like originally there was more interest after seeing the springboard and like, oh, this would be good for our kids to combine the Chinese DLI programs. And then after hearing from the Woodstock families, there was a change in that perspective, and now saying that that Harrison Park parents don't want that because out of consideration for the Woodstock families. But ultimately, I think the major thing is that the Harrison Park Chinese families want to stay in the neighborhood that we're in currently. It's been more other groups from that have had the stronger preference about Franklin High School. I haven't heard that as much from the Chinese families, but I think that would, there's not like an objection to that. But I was just going to say also about, Woodstock and about the Hosford over enrollment, that I think there are definitely solutions involving Lane in phase 2, for Hosford's enrollment.
Yeah, and I would just like to also add that Hosford's Mandarin immersion program has 2 strands until 8th grade and then has to be combined into 1 strand because of enrollment. And I think that considering the opportunities that Hosford kids have because of attending such a large school and a Mandarin immersion program, it's pretty significant. And I'm not sure I am not sure what the experience is if you have 1 strand. And that's what I'm hearing a lot from families, is that difference in experience from being an immersion student at a school with a very different enrollment is not as positive. And so I understand wanting to sustain what you have already, and we love our immersion program, and also this is about all kids and all our immersion kids.
Caitlin, and am I to assume that the needing to consolidate from the 2 strands to 1 strand is because half of that strand, or like that 1 strand, pretty much leaves to join the IB program over at Cleveland?
It's like there's two classes of 24 at 6th grade, 2 classes of 23 at 7th grade, and then it drops off enough in 8th grade that we're down to 1 class of 41, sometimes 42, which is a huge class. But when our average 8th grade class is staffed at 36 to 37, I can't split that in 2 and have 2 classes of 20 kids when 8th grade core classes in all the other classes are 36, 37, 38. So that is to say that's why it combines. Most students from Hosford's Mandarin immersion program in 8th grade go to Cleveland High School, and there is some dropout rate of being in the immersion program once they're at Cleveland, but the Hosford to Cleveland is maybe 1 kid will leave, but not often more. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Oh, just a point of clarification that someone mentioned to me this week that there was like a misunderstanding that the Chinese DLI program at Harrison Park is Cantonese and that they're like actually different, but all the Chinese DLI programs within PPS are all Mandarin, just to clarify that. So they could be combined.
The confusion might be because Harrison Park Chinese community has a larger proportion of Cantonese speaking families that are enrolled in the DLI program. I've tuned into the Chinese focus option groups held in Chinese, and I would say there's very little representation by Harrison Park Chinese DLI families. And I would also say that we won't hear as much about middle school because those students have not got, like, I think they're at 4th grade right now. Like, so the program is still building.
Yep.
So you're not going to hear the concerns of those parents because they're not at the middle school age yet, where they're going to be like, oh, where they have really strong feelings about like Hosford or not, because, you know, their kid isn't there. But I would agree with what's stated. I'm sure there's high interest in finding a walkable, you know, going to a middle school that is geographically a lot closer. And of course, we've heard they're very interested in their students going to Franklin. And I think they should be, just in terms of geographics. Like if we're talking about the RESJ lens and centering those students and centering those families, about like where Chinese DLI could be consolidated. And I would agree with Caitlin at the middle school. It's super, I think given like the number of strands and the numbers, it would be good for students and for teachers to consolidate Chinese DLI at the middle school level.
So I see Rosie has her hand up, and then wanted to make sure people who haven't jumped in yet have a chance to jump in the conversation.
Yeah. I can default to anyone else. This is a sort of a semi-tangent. I just thought of it because I saw Chris's image pop up. We're talking about DLI, and does Franklin have Mandarin classes? I heard from a friend that they have like an AP Mandarin class at Franklin.
We do. We have AP Chinese. So yes, we've got Chinese 1 all the way up to AP, and we also have Russian immersion and Spanish immersion.
Because one thought I had was like maybe the current Cleveland freshmen could finish DLI there. If there are teachers certified to teach Chinese at Franklin, then it could almost be this like the kids that are at Cleveland wouldn't have to leave there. Like they could finish there, and then starting this newer enrollment piece, maybe Franklin could start to absorb the Mandarin program, knowing that there's potentially enough staff to finish at Cleveland with that group and then start it over at Franklin. So that was my random tangent. I wanted to say that out loud before I forget, so it gets written maybe somewhere or heard by other ears.
I think the only challenge with that is it puts more kids at Franklin.
There's those brick walls that I keep running into again.
As we pause to make sure we've heard for some voices, start thinking in your head if you have to rank a choice or rank some options, what that might look like.
Okay, just to be really clear, we are not like completely committed in phase 1 to determining the DLI. We have to determine the DLI placements within the schools that feed to Kellogg, or we don't have to.
So as we consider, if a school has a DLI program in it, and I'll use Lent as an example, and you decide to move Lent whole school into Kellogg, then the Spanish DLI would be at Kellogg. It's not meant to be a Spanish DLI decision, but it is meant to, that if you're not going to leave half a Lent not placed, right?
Right. But so for example, if we if we recommended option C, we are not saying that we couldn't add, like, for example, Spanish DLI to our LEDA.
No, that's not out of, yeah, that's not a decision. We're not making K-5 program change decisions in phase 1. If it is tied to Kellogg opening, then it's where we'd consider it. And it's also the other places where Bridger is overcrowded and we have to move some students out of Bridger because they will run out of classrooms.
Right. So for example, one potential conclusion is option C with Bridger's current 6th through 8 DLI students attending Kellogg and Bridger's current 6th through 8 neighborhoods strand attending Harrison Park.
Yes, that I've heard that multiple times, and that is certainly, so you could pick a option that you guys rank high, and you can modify your option and say, and we'd also like Bridger, if it's not included there already, we could also say, and the solution to the Bridger overcrowding would be to do that, what you just described. That is where I'm hearing a lot of consensus from as I go from room to room.
And then would
When should we go?
Sorry.
Sorry, Regina, go ahead.
Would an option later on then be for like Bridger, like Spanish K-5 to then, let's say, move to our LEDA? Is that like something that could happen at a later phase? Because then that's about program as opposed to the neighborhood schools feeding to Kellogg.
So I haven't thought this through to understand what the implications would be. But, you know, I'm hearing the proposal, and it's not something, you know, it's okay to talk about it. But in terms of right now, the two things that we're deciding is the overcrowding at Bridger and the Kellogg. So I'm going to try to leave ideas open. And so, but at the same time, there has to, you know, it has to fit at our LEDA, right? Yeah.
I would just add to that, you know, having our LEDA as part of the Kellogg feeder does pitch you in a situation where if that decision were made down the road, you wouldn't have a split feeder between a DLI program at our LEDA if it were to go on to Kellogg.
Right, exactly. And then, you know, having determining now that Bridger's neighborhood students would go to Harrison Park is like, you know, preparing for our assumed idea that Bridger feeds to Harrison Park, right, in phase 2.
Okay, so can I don't know which option this is because there's too many options, but here is what I think we've said. So going to Kellogg is Arleta, Marysville, Lent, and Bridger DLI next year. And the only other part of that is then to Harrison Park is Bridger neighborhood.
Melissa, did we also think Mount Tabor DLI going to Kellogg? Was that part of the conversation?
I didn't hear that. And then if that's the case, then it is like option C, but then the numbers would be less, I think, in terms of like utilization, because C includes all of the strands.
So are we also saying that we want Mount Tabor? And then I guess then the other question is Atkinson. Is that on here someplace?
Well, yeah, isn't Mount Tabor Atkinson? Mount Tabor is Atkinson strand, right? Is that what you're thinking, Richard?
Sorry. Oh, that's the same thing. Yeah. So it's Atkinson DLI.
So if we want all 4 strands of Spanish DLI at Kellogg, which I thought we heard consensus earlier that we wanted Kellogg to have all.
Okay. So I just want to make sure I'm writing it like, see, it's all these little details. Are we also then saying, are we saying that for Mount Tabor DLI, the kids are already there? Do they finish it out?
Thanks.
Do they have a choice maybe?
Yeah, well, how does that, well, I don't think they'd have a choice because then you're talking about staffing. I'm
Well,
wondering how that
according to the PPS school board and the meeting that they had last week, the school board said, for lack of better words, rip the Band-Aid off and do it all at once rather than doing it little by little. So, and I'm just passing the message of what the school board said. So don't get
Okay, so then let me say this again though. So we have Arleta, Marysville, Lent, Bridger, DLI, Atkinson's DLI, and Mount Tabor DLI going to Kellogg next year.
So as far as future, phase 2 implications from an RESJ focus, I would say that another major issue is whether Vestal would go to Mount Tabor and then, Mount Tabor go to Madison. Because if we're looking at Harrison Park feeders, we need to be thinking about Vestal. So personally, I just don't see how we can actually be accomplishing the, making decisions based on the lens and have Vestal, a really diverse and lower income school feed to Harrison Park, and how that would ever balance things appropriately. So I'm a proponent of Vestal going to Mount Tabor. And then did everyone see like the numbers Beth put together for considering future Franklin High School numbers? So Glencoe has a really large number of students who feed to Mount Tabor Middle School, like over 300. So that is a really key factor in not over enrolling Franklin, is to have Mount Tabor feed to Madison. That would be the most impactful thing for not overcrowding Franklin. So I do think that's really big, and that also would be essential to allowing Harrison Park to feed to Franklin. Like Mount Tabor would have to. So then if Vestal is going to Mount Tabor and not to Harrison Park, who is going to Harrison Park? I don't see any way or any other option besides Bridger and, most likely like Atkinson neighborhood students. And that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's what it's looking like, because Bridger and Atkinson are the two closest ones to Harrison Park in the long run.
And, Harrison Park, so the 3 feeders to Harrison Park would be Harrison Park, right?
Well, Clark potentially.
Clark, however you want it, yeah, right? And then Bridger and Atkinson.
Right.
I think these are
goes to Mount Tabor.
Sorry.
Then who would go to Mount Tabor Middle School then?
Well, Vestal, Glencoe, and then possibly still Richmond. I think that would be to be determined.
So we're down phase 2 now.
Well, we have to be, because we have to.
So I appreciate walking through. I think before they pull us back, I just want to kind of see where people are in terms of the ranking.
Well, I'm just I'm just cautioning about like determining that Atkinson like feeds to Kellogg, and all of those implications. Do you know how much time do we have left?
I think we're only saying Atkinson DLI to Kellogg. We're not saying the whole school.
Right.
I get what you're doing. Like, it's like playing chess, right? Like we just did a move, and what does that mean? 4 moves forward. That's what you're thinking, Marissa?
Yes, I play a lot of chess because Harrison Park has a very active chess club my daughter is on.
Well, we're just starting ours at Bridger this year, so awesome.
Leopard's got the best chess team in Southeast. You got to compete.
I think in all the thing is that I've been telling a lot of families at Atkinson, both neighborhood and Spanish DLI, is that not everybody is gonna get what they want. So what are you willing to lose? What are and not just to think about what benefits the self, but actually benefits the community and the whole district as a whole. And I keep on saying that over and over again of like, what is the cost that you're willing to give that will benefit the whole over the long run, right? That puts and centralizes historically minoritized and other groups within decision making.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes. So let me give a direction, and then Beth, I'll hand it to you. So this is a quick Google form. It's not scientific by any means. Just for you to think about how you would rank these options. And I thought about having people put in the chat, and I felt I'd lose somebody. So this will give us a way to make sure we don't lose it as we go back to the main room. And then we'll go to Beth and then talk about kind of how people are filling out that form. So
I had 2 questions. One was the enrollment numbers at Lane. If I remember correctly, those were pretty low. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And just throwing something out there, I'm wondering, is it better to have Atkinson go to Harrison Park or Marysville go to Harrison Park? They're virtually the same distance as the crow flies, not. And I'm just wondering, because Atkinson literally crosses in front of Kellogg or to get to Harrison Park.
That's very interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Beth.
So I'll throw out the Marysville piece of that. Is you think about Marysville going to Harrison Park and how many streets, busy streets, high crash zones, multiple layers that they'd have to get to Harrison Park. Marysville's community is very walk-friendly community, and so part of that is that piece that you have to think about, and the socioeconomic impact of those families, specifically having to drive essentially for safety reasons to get to Harrison Park. I know it's not what everyone wants to hear, but it's the reality of that particular piece from a Marysville point of view.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think the transportation piece is a concern that I have for Atkinson and Creston, Woodstock going to, Woodstock Lane versus Hosford. I mean, that's always been a question of mine. We have some very busy streets and not a lot of great pathways for a lot of our kids.
Well, I see it as, the farther east you go, the higher poverty we have. And so I see the balance being like an east-west view of, feeding Harrison Park and Kellogg versus a north-south. Otherwise, you're not balancing the poverty level equally among those 2 middle schools. I also I'm just not sympathetic to the argument that Atkinson families can't access Harrison Park. There's a very easy and safe bike route that is literally 10 to 11 minutes that I do almost every day between Harrison Park and Atkinson. So I just don't see that as an argument that it's too far.
So you guys on the survey, are we just typing in other and typing in what we came up with? Can we agree that that's what we're doing?
Isn't option C the option C with the note what we decided?
that's what I was trying to get at. Yeah. I don't think I have all the details.
I don't know. I typed it into other and just put everything in there. Arleta, Marysville, Lent, Bridger, DLI, Atkinson, DLI, Mount Tabor, DLI, and Bridger neighborhood going to Harrison Park.
Melissa, you might have nominated yourself to be our speaker.
I do think the issue of transportation is important though for Creston and Atkinson, and later hopefully in the boundary we can look at those ones, the neighborhoods right around Powell, those chunks that they get, that they get safer to Kellogg.
I think the one thing about Atkinson, like she said, is that in our neighborhood there was a whole bunch of construction that has addressed that. So
okay. But Creston still has a chunk that's pretty close that would be far away, I think.
Thank you all.